My guest today is Thomas Arnett. Tom is a senior research fellow in education at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. His work focuses on disruptive innovations in K 12 education and the changing roles of teachers in innovative educational models. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Brigham Young University and an MBA from Carnegie Mellon. Tom is the author of a new paper on why parents choose microschools. Tom, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Well, thanks, Carrie, for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this topic and especially with you. So appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, well, thanks for being here. The new paper is excellent. I'll definitely link to it in the show notes. It's also available on the Clayton Christensen website. And maybe we start there, Tom. So, Clayton Christensen was a well known Harvard Business School professor who popularized the term disruptive innovation and
Mhm.
collaborated on development of the jobs to be done framework to better understand consumer decision making. And that is really what you looked at, this jobs to be done theory, as it relates to parent decision making around choosing microschools. So I wonder if we could start with your description of what the jobs to be done theory is in general for folks who may not be familiar with
Mhm.
it. And then we can go into more specifically how you used it in thinking about microschooling.
Yeah. So jobs to be done is kind of a funny term, right? Jobs to be done. What does that even mean? But let me give a little bit of the origin of this. So Clayton Christensen was trying to understand what drives demand, and in particular, demand for new products. And he noticed that there was a high rate of failure of companies releasing new products and, not having always great success. And one of the patterns he noticed was just a flaw in the way that companies typically did their marketing, where they would look at people's demographic profiles, they'd look at product features, they'd do focus groups, they'd do surveys, and they try to find correlations between what features people want in a product or a service and the attributes of that person. And he noticed that, that's correlation, but it doesn't really get at causation. So he'd say things like, I at the time, he's like, I'm a middle-aged man in a certain income bracket with a certain profession, but that doesn't tell you why I buy the New York Times. If you look at it more deeply, it's I buy the New York Times because I'm going to be meeting with some colleagues and I want to be informed on current events, or I'm going to an event or an activity after work and I want to be able to talk about sports and what's the latest in the sports world. So it's really the circumstances in our lives that motivate us to choose the things we do and pull those things into our lives. So jobs to be done, like why that name? Well, he looked at it and he said, just like, when your car breaks down on a road trip, you have a job of I need a mechanic to help me get my car fixed. I need a tow truck to help me get to the mechanic. Or you come home from work one day and you find there's water all over your bathroom floor. I have a job where I need a plumber to help me fix my bathroom. And so similar, he'd say the jobs to be done idea revolves around, well, what are the things that happen in our lives that cause a job that we are hiring for, where we need to find a solution and pull it into our lives? Really, it's about, what are the moments we're struggling in that motivate us to seek out a change in behavior, a change in circumstance, a change in solution.
I wonder if you can share a little bit about the famous milkshake story, because I think, at least for me, that was sort of what crystallized the jobs to be done theory and its real impact from sort of a strategic business perspective.
Yeah, it's a great story. It's really sticky, no pun intended there. But it was probably I think it was the first jobs to be done study that Clayton Christensen did in conjunction with Bob Mesta. And to give a little background, Bob, he co-founded and leads an organization called the Rewired Group. We actually partnered with them on this study. Um, but Bob, in conducting this study, they were working with a fast food chain that was trying to figure out how do we do milkshake sales, and they'd done the typical things companies do. They'd tried different flavor combinations with focus groups and asked people, do you like it sweeter, not so sweet? Do you like chunks of candy or fruit in it? Do you not like chunks of candy? Do you like this design of the cup or that design of the cup? And so they'd done all that research, and they weren't really seeing a change in their sales. So Clayton Christensen and Bob and their team, on day one, they just go sit and watch people walking in and out of the fast food chain and just observing, like, when are people buying milkshakes? And they noticed this really interesting pattern where roughly 50% of the milkshakes were sold before 8 in the morning. And they were kind of surprised, like eight in the morning, milkshake's a dessert item. You don't eat dessert that they ate in the morning. So the next day they went back and they started interviewing people, effectively asking them, what job are you hiring this milkshake to do? What are the circumstances in your life that make you want to buy a milkshake in the morning? And they started to see this pattern where a lot of these milkshake consumers were people with long and boring commutes to work. And they were in a hurry. They weren't particularly hungry, but they knew that they would be hungry by lunchtime if they didn't have something to eat. And they needed something stimulating and engaging for this long, boring drive. And they realized that the milkshake really did that job to be done better than a lot of the other alternatives. So they'd say, you could have a banana or you could have a granola bar, but you're going to consume that really quickly and it might not hold you over until lunchtime. You could have a donut that might get your fingers sticky though. And a lot of the other options require two hands. But the milkshake, it fits in one hand. It doesn't make a mess of your professional attire. Um, and it takes a long time to consume. And so it gives you just a little bit of satisfaction and mental stimulation during this long and boring commute. And so when they understood that about why are people hiring milkshakes, they realized, it's not really, people may say they want a healthy option, but in those circumstances and those struggles, health isn't the top thing on their mind. Um, but so what is it that's going to make a better milkshake? It has less to do with, the particular flavor, but more to do with things like, can you make it really convenient? These people are in a hurry. Can you help them get in and out of the store quicker by, maybe having a punch card and to make the purchase more quick, or having a bunch of, pre-made flavors that you can hand out the door really quickly. They also realized, things like the viscosity matter because the thicker the milkshake is, the longer it takes you to consume it, which means it'll last your whole drive to work and hold you over till lunchtime. Um, as a quick, contrast with that, they noticed that a lot of the other milkshakes were sold in the afternoon, but in that circumstance, the job to be done was really different. It was often parents buying milkshakes for their kids. And as they interviewed these parents, they found for them it was, I've got a bunch of errands to run. We're running from one activity to the other. I need something to placate my kids. Give me something quick and simple that'll do that job. And in that circumstance, you wanted a very different milkshake. You didn't want that big, thick, viscous milkshake that was going to hold you over till lunchtime, because you didn't want to sit in the restaurant for half an hour waiting for your kid to consume the milkshake and then end up throwing half of it in the trash can at the end anyway. So that just pointed out that, like, the first of all, that milkshakes weren't just competing with other milkshakes, they were competing with a lot of other solutions for that job to be done. And also that one product, that solution, actually served different jobs to be done for different people at different times of the day.
So great. And sort of similarities too, right? That the person commuting to work doesn't want crumbs on his or her attire, as you said. And also
Yeah.
the parent at the end of the day doesn't want crumbs in his or her car on the way home or
Hmm.
to an activity. So similarities there. And I'm just curious if sort of understanding these patterns of consumer behavior, did that enable the fast food chain to kind of lean into that? Did they then sort of shift their marketing so that they were trying to attract and satisfy customers? And did they see a kind of a boost in sales as a result of that? Or what was the sort of outcome?
The outcome? Well, as I understand the story, the fast food chain actually did not take the recommendations that they that they gave them. But fast forward and you see the popularity like a McDonald's of their strawberry smoothies, or you see the rise of options like Jamba Juice. And even though that fast food didn't take the recommendations, the thing that solves that job to be done did take off.
So others discovered that there was an unmet need there, and then
Mhm.
they swept in to fill it. And so this is what you sort of started to look at with microschools and decisions that parents are making to switch from maybe a conventional classroom to a microschool. So I wonder if you can talk about how you use the jobs to be done framework to analyze parent choices.
Yeah. Well, so just like they interviewed folks coming out of the fast food restaurants, we sat down and interviewed a panel of parents. And I shouldn't say a panel because we didn't interview them together. They were separate interviews. But we found a bunch of parents who had made that switch. And that's really key. You can't ask people about, like, what do you think you would prefer? You need to actually talk to people who have made a change And then you don't ask them, why did you make that decision? We ask them, shoot us the documentary of your life. Tell us the story of the events that led up to that decision. Because people, if you ask them, why did you do this? They'll make up a bunch of rationalizations that may or may not have been the actual reasons that drove their decisions. But if you ask them to tell you the story that led to that decision, you start to uncover what are these circumstances in your life that moved you toward that change. So again, we interviewed a bunch of parents, and then looking across those interviews, started to see patterns where different stories kind of clustered together with similar patterns in the stories. So uh, we ended up with kind of identifying three different jobs or three different pathways that were leading parents to make these changes to unconventional schools. So job one, we call when I disagree with decisions at my child's school and I'm feeling unheard, help me find an alternative that will honor my perspective and values. So that's a wordy explanation, but let me give a story for that one that will help make more sense. One of the parents we interviewed was a woman who had been sending her children. She had, I think, two daughters, and they were going to a private school that they really appreciated because they liked the sense of community the school offered, the sense of personalization the school offered. But then the school ran into some financial troubles, and it was a parish school, and the parish had to. They were going to close the school down, and a bunch of parents stepped in and said, "Hey, why don't we take the school over, and we'll try and maintain the same values, the same model of schooling, but we'll just switch the governance structure and the ownership." And they did this. Um, but then as time went on, she saw as the school was trying to figure out how to make its finances work, they were starting to add more and more programs and expand the school in ways that would attract more families. But it was losing that feel that had attracted her to the school in the first place. And she was a single mom and was barely making ends meet and wasn't one of the big donors. And she felt that part of the job that's when I'm feeling unheard, she felt like I don't really get listened to because I'm not one of these big donors that can write a big check to build, a new gym and then can have my say about how the programs at the school should work. And so in that frustration where she felt like the school isn't what it used to be, but more than just it's changed, but also they've changed and I don't feel like I have a voice that gets listened to. That's what motivated her to switch and end up finding a micro school. Um, the second job we describe it this way: when my child is unhappy, unsafe, or struggling at school, help me find an environment where they can regain their love for learning. This job took on a lot of different variations. So that struggle that the child felt, it could be because they're struggling academically and they don't like feeling at school like they're dumb. Or it could be because they're struggling with reading and they don't like getting drilled on more and more reading activities and exercises. Um, it could be because they're getting bullied and they just don't feel safe at school, or it could be they just feel anxious in a school environment, or the school is really rigid in its discipline and the kid is getting disciplined a lot. So there's a whole host of reasons for why the child might have been struggling, but the big contrast here is where the first job was about the parent struggle with I don't feel like I'm being heard. The second job was really around the child's struggle, and really often what that struggle had to build to a point where the parent was feeling like I'm battling with my child every morning to get them to get out the door and go to school. They don't want to go. And at that point, when the child's struggle starts to really impact the parent and they feel like I'm fighting with my kid over just liking school and going to school, that's what motivated them to go and look for a different option. Then the last one we describe this way: when my child's school is too focused on academic milestones and neglects other forms of learning, help me find a balanced educational experience for my child. So these are really parents that said, look, I value certain things about learning, whether it's I value my child being able to express their creativity or explore or learn more through play. And I feel like my school is too focused on standardized tests and really rigid modes of instruction. I just value a different kind of education that I'm not getting at my conventional school. Help me find something different. So, in those jobs to be done, that they don't necessarily describe every single parent out there and why they might change schools, but those are the three big patterns we saw driving parents to say, "I need something different. Help me find a different solution."
Yeah, so that's just so fascinating, Tom. So maybe help us think a little bit more about it. And particularly number three, right? That parents are
Hmm.
saying, help me find a school or a learning environment that's less focused on kind of core academics or as you said, sort of standardized approaches to learning. But I imagine there's also parents who might go the other way, right? Particularly as their
Hmm.
kids get older, they might say, gee, I love a more unstructured or play-based or self-directed education environment in the younger grades. But when they get
Hmm.
closer to high school, I might want something more academic. Did that show up in any of your interviews? Or I guess, how do we sort of think about those choices?
Yeah, that did show up. And that was a pattern we saw in many of the interviews that the parents said, I chose this micro schooling or this hybrid homeschooling option um, because it felt right for my kid in those younger years. And then as they get closer to high school, the parent starts to worry about things like, well, I want my kid to go to a conventional college, which means they need to build all the things on a conventional high school transcript. And so that steered them back. And one of the things that highlights is that jobs are not personas. Like, don't equate them with there's a certain type of person that is this job, and there's another type of person that is another job. Jobs actually are based on the circumstances of people's lives. And so, as people's circumstances change, the jobs to be done change. Um, and so, a solution that they hire in one moment for particular struggles they're facing may not be the solution they stick with forever, because when different struggles arise in their lives, they'll switch to a they may switch to a different solution. The other thing, though, that I think highlights is that jobs to be done also, just like in the milkshake story, there were substitutes for milkshakes that weren't milkshakes. You could try a candy bar, or you could try, a donut or a banana. Similarly, there are other things besides schooling that can sometimes fulfill these jobs to be done. So, for example, a parent may say, instead of switching my kid out of a very learner-centered school to go to a conventional school, they could say, I'm going to hire a supplement. So I'm going to stick with the learner-centered school, but maybe, do some kind of math program on the side. Um, that's going to prepare my kids. So that's the other thing to consider is um, there can actually be things that fulfill jobs to be done that don't all fit in the same category of a school or a milkshake.
And more coming on the scene every day, which is exciting. So you talk in this paper, which is called um, Families on the
The
New Frontier, Mapping and Meeting the Growing Demand for Unconventional Schooling. Such a great topic or title. And I'd love to know, Tom, did you look at families or parent decision making kind of right out of the gate? This is really focused on parents making a switch into an
Mhm.
unconventional education environment. I know you said we shouldn't get too hung up on personas, but I'll personalize it a little bit to say that, I made the decision even before having kids to choose unconventional education, and there are others like me. Did
Mhm.
that show up in your data, or was this really just focused on families making a switch from one school environment to another?
Mhm. That did show up, and it probably showed up most in that third job to be done, where parents just had a different set of priorities, a different notion of what's the purpose of schooling, what should schooling be, most in that third job. But one of the things that I think this research helps elevate is that while there are families out there in the world that just have a different set of what they want out of schooling, and that motivates them to make changes, there's a lot of other families that that's not what's driving them. It's usually those moments of struggle where conventional schooling is fine until it's not, and then that motivates them to go look for something different. Um, and so that's one of the things I think people in the microschooling space should be mindful of is that, you may bill your school as, hey, we're really about learner-centered education, or we're really about, certain pedagogical philosophies or approaches. Those might not actually be the reasons that families are coming to you. And
Mm.
so understanding their jobs to be done can help you figure out, how do we deal with that? One option is we say, hey, look, a lot of families are coming for reasons different than just what we're advertising. So maybe we think more about, well, how do we make sure we're fulfilling those jobs to be done? Or you might, one of the other recommendations from jobs to be done is you can't be all things to all people. It's really hard, not impossible, but it's really hard to be really good at doing all of the jobs to be done. So you might need to say, look, we're really good at doing this job to be done. We're actually not good at this one. And so if families are coming to us because they're hiring for a different job than the one that we're really focused on trying to fulfill and fulfill well, the best answer might be helping that family find a different option that is better aligned with their actual job to be done.
Yeah, and you do a good job in the paper of sort of illustrating that, right? Like saying that founders have to be true to their mission,
Mhm.
and it's sometimes, as a small business owner or someone trying to satisfy their customers, they want to be all things to all people. But yeah, you make a good point that, and I think the example that you use is you have a micro school that might have some, academic content, and that you have a founder who's really focused on making sure to hit those key content areas. And then you'll have a family who really wants much more of an unstructured, non-academic or play-based environment, and that just might not be a good fit. So, for important for founders to have those tough conversations. And
Mhm.
just back to your earlier point, Tom, it sounds like thinking about the world of founders, and right, more and more micro schools and education entrepreneurs appearing all the time, that they should really be thinking about how to market their services
Mhm.
to families who are currently in an existing conventional school, and not so much families like mine who might be, who might find alternative education appealing more philosophically. We're more the minority, I suppose,
Yeah.
than kind of the current trend. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what else, like what sort of the outcome of this paper? What do you hope it does and contributes to kind of the larger conversation around alternative education?
Yeah. Well, I hope that it helps people see kind of what are the next steps for options like microschooling. Not just the jobs to be done framework really helps with focus. It helps you understand better what is it that people want, what are they struggling with, so we can better fulfill that. And candidly, I think there's actually a lot of people. So again, jobs to be done really start with a moment of struggle. And I think there's a lot of the struggles that we surfaced in our jobs to be done that lots of families are experiencing, but not necessarily at the level of intensity that motivates them to change schools. And so
Mm.
it's kind of like there's some unfulfilled demand there where families want something different, but it may, like, their current option may not be painful enough, or their current circumstances may not be painful enough that is pushing them toward a switch. So, how do you understand that and then address that for them? And if I can just layer in one more little framework, in the jobs to be done, we talk about there's two things that move people toward a change and two things that hold them back. The things that move them toward change are those struggles. And then as they start looking for options, the things that they find appealing and enticing and attractive about solutions they learn about. But running counter to those two forces are one, what we call habits, in that it's just easier to stick with what you know. You develop certain routines in your life. You're used to, hey, in the morning we wake the kids up, we feed them breakfast, we make their lunches, we drop them off at school, we go to work, right? That habit, for better or for worse, like, helps you make the rest of your life more manageable. And so those habits keep us stuck in the status quo a lot of times, even when we're struggling a little bit with the status quo, just because they make life more convenient. Um, the other thing is anxiety. Whenever people are thinking about making a switch, they always have question marks around, like, is this going to work for me? So with the schooling option, it might be, will my child actually like it? Are they actually going to thrive here? Are they going to get all the other things they need in addition to being happy in school? Are they going to get all the other learning experiences that their current school provides or that seem important for them based on what they're used to? And so I think what the jobs to be done framework helps us see is, for families that are struggling, but their habits and their anxieties are still holding them back, what can we do to address those habits and anxieties in ways that lower the trade-off we're asking them to make, so that it doesn't feel like such a leap, so they don't have to be struggling so much to be motivated to make the leap.
And what could be some of those strategies to make it less anxiety ridden?
Yeah. Um, well, one is to well, let me say one is to find families when they're feeling those anxieties, when
Hmm.
they're feeling those struggles, and having social proof. So one of the most compelling things for families, and this comes from a lot of research in sociology around when people say they make a decision, often the biggest predictor of whether they make that switch is whether they look around and they see other people like me are also making this switch. Therefore, it must be worth paying attention to. Therefore, it must not be that risky because other people like me have done it and they've been successful. And so, one of our big insights is, find ways to meet people that are struggling and help them connect with other people that have had those struggles, who have made a switch to help lower the anxiety. So,
Mm.
one of the recommendations we make in the paper is consider things like um, sponsoring a community group, whether that's on Facebook or an in-person group. If it's job two, it may be around like students who are struggling with, ADHD, or students who are struggling with reading or struggling with math or struggling with bullying. Find the spaces where parents with those struggles are finding each other and looking for help, or maybe consider creating one of those spaces. And don't make it explicitly about advertising for your school, but make it a place where people can connect, and where some of those people, as they connect, know of your school and are sharing with others, hey, I felt that struggle too, and I found, this space where things work better for me and for my kid.
You talk in the paper, Tom, about these habits and
Hmm.
how the COVID-19 pandemic and school shutdowns and remote learning um, sort of jostled families and broke them free from those habits. Did that come out in the conversations you had with parents in your focus groups with them, or conversations with them, that they said that COVID was a catalyst?
Yeah, that was definitely showed up in a lot of the interviews that we saw, was that they made the switch during COVID, but then a lot of them, we were interviewing folks who had persisted beyond COVID, so they'd found other reasons to stay.
Hmm.
But COVID was, if you think of like there's forces moving people toward change and there's forces holding them back, it's like COVID wiped out one of those things that held people back. All of a sudden, they couldn't just rely on their habits. And so someone who may not have been struggling enough to break a routine, when that routine went away, that struggle became real enough that, okay, since we have to find another option, let's go look for things that are going to satisfy our job to be done.
Fascinating. So just such important and valuable research. Thank you so much for doing it. I think it really, helps unconventional parents and founders kind of navigate this new world, this new ecosystem of options, and figure out how to best meet each other's needs. So Tom, I'd love to hear what you have on deck going forward. What other research projects are you working on, or things ahead for you?
Well, we've got a number of things I'm pretty excited about. I think of the work kind of spanning two sides of a broader project that is about what is it going to take to move education from the conventional batch processing model to new models of schooling. And this jobs to be done research is really about the demand side of what's motivating people to want new models of schooling. The other side of my work is really on the supply side of what are the circumstances that allow new models of schooling to emerge, to evolve, and hopefully eventually become, a new mainstream normal version of schooling. Because we've had new models of schooling for a long time. They've been largely kind of on the periphery, kind of in little niches, serving niches of the education landscape. But my broader work is really drawing on Clayton Christensen's theories around disruptive innovation to say, what is it going to take for those models to um, become more mainstream and widespread?
Yeah, if I can actually just follow up on that a little bit, then, Tom,
Hmm.
is when Clayton Christensen helped popularize this notion of disruptive innovation, it was really focused around the disruptive nature of technology, right?
Hmm.
And so, do you feel like disruptive innovation can be extended beyond that to sort of non-technology solutions and inputs?
Yeah, well, the answer is yes, and yes, but with a caveat.
Mm.
In that all the disruptive innovations we've studied, they have a technology that enables that disruptive innovation, but it's not necessarily a tech-rich experience. So think of like Airbnb. When you stay in an Airbnb, it's not a high-tech experience, but there's a technology behind the scenes that enables you to have that experience in the Airbnb. Um, Similarly, like I look at a lot of new schooling models, it's not necessarily that kids are, we're moving toward a future where kids are going to wear VR headsets and talk to chatbots all day. But behind the scenes, you have technologies that make it so that, you know, in a conventional high school, you need to have an expert in every single subject area to teach all the different academic disciplines. Well, now with access to online learning resources and things that help you coordinate learning experiences in your community, those technologies make it so that you don't necessarily have to have this whole panel of adult experts on all the different subjects and how to teach all of those different subjects. Similarly, I think of like technologies behind the scenes that just coordinate things like all the things about managing a school that would be hard to do um, without technology behind the scenes making it easier. Or things that help you coordinate different learning experiences across your community. So it's not necessarily that I think the future of schooling is high tech, but the
Mm.
future of schooling, the new models of schooling, I think are going to be enabled by tech behind the scenes that helps them become, even more reliable over time, even more just workable for a lot more people.
Such an exciting time in education. And again, your work is so valuable. How can my listeners and viewers connect with you and learn more about your work and follow your research?
Two ways. One is if you go to the Christensen Institute website, you can sign up for our newsletter, and that's where all of our new papers and our blog posts and things come out. The other thing is to find me on LinkedIn. That's where I post all my latest stuff is on my LinkedIn feed.
Wonderful. Well, Thomas Arnett, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. Really fun to have this conversation.